It's in the middle of the night in the Gulf of Bothnia between Sweden and Finland. On the bridge of the somewhat worn vessel and cyclers, three tired men is staring on a flickering sonar screen. They have been out for over a week. The ship has been leaking, spent time in dry dock in Finland, and their hunt for a shipwreck carrying champagne has, so far, been a bust. The sonar paints the same picture as always: mud, small ridges, and the occasional older wreck. A ping, an echo, a grainy shadow, and so on. The ship's course following long straight lines as they are plowing heaven and sea in neat rows. And then it happens. On the screen, a shape emerges that brings everything to a standstill. A nearly perfect circle, roughly 60 meters across, like a jumbo jet lay flat, with a long straight runway tailing behind it, a 300-meter long scar in the seabed. Peter Lindbergh leans forward and says, half amused, half seriously, "Here's your UFO." They laugh nervously, but no one walks away from the screen, because in the middle of the sea, filled with perfectly ordinary shipwrecks, they found something they never seen before. Weeks later, when they return with divers, they report that electronics dies every time the ship comes within 200 meters of the object, satellite phones lose signals, GPS goes black, camera and sonar gives up. 90 meters down, a diver hovers in the pitch black water. He reaches out his hand and feels like hard rock, dark surfaces that feels like burnt concrete, yet simultaneously forms something that feels like walls, corners, and steps. This is the story of the Baltic Sea Anomaly. I'm René, and you're listening to Lost Civilization, Ancient Aliens, and Forgotten History. The Baltic Sea Anomaly has become an icon in modern mystery culture, not because we found little green men at the bottom of the Baltic, but because the case is just open enough for everyone to hang their own theory on it. When Ocean X goes public, the story explodes. Swedish and international media runs headlines like "Crashed Spaceship" and "Millennium Falcon in the Seabed." YouTube fills with documentaries of corpse of technology, terrifying AI scans, scientist stunts, and UFO communities and alternative historians see physical proof for everything from Atlantis to ancient spacecraft. At the same time, the Baltic Sea is something special. Brackish water with low salinity, cold temperature, and oxygen-poor depths makes it the sea a natural museum. Wrecks like the Vasa and Mars lies nearly untouched, and newer wrecks like the Estonia are so sensitive that the authorities have tried legally to protect them and even considering encasing them in concrete. In that context, a 60-meter round object with a runway reported electromagnetic anomalies and dark basalt samples naturally stands out. So, we are still talking about it because the scientific explanation exists, but feels unsatisfying. The alternative theories are fascinating but weakly substantiated, and no one has taken the final expensive step, a full, independent, open expedition with core drilling and systematic measurements. This is precisely in that gap that the great podcast stories live. Let's start with the chronology and the most solid facts first. In 2011, the discovery, Ocean X is searching for a champagne wreck in the Gulf of Bothnia. The ship Antiklos has been leaking, spent time in dry dock in Finland, and the mood is tired and mildly frustrated. On the way home, they leave the side scan sonar dangling in the water just to take one last trip. And then it happens. Roughly 60 meters in diameter, about 90 meters depth, and with a 300-meter long distinct structure tailing behind it in the sonar image. In 2012, we have the expedition. After massive media interest, they managed to scrape together funding for a larger expedition. The budget is around 120,000 euros, and just the fuel and the ship operational cost, according to them, over 20,000 euros per day. So they have only a few days to get results. And here we have a series of concrete data points and episodes. Side-scan sonar and multibeam are used to relocate the object. It takes over 40 hours to scan an area of just over square nautical miles, and they even lose the sonar fish on the bottom and have to retrieve it with an ROV in zero visibility. And Swedish Navy vessel is observed nearby without any clear reason, which later become fuel for speculation about military interest. We also have ROV footage that shows hard, relatively smooth surface with sharp transitions and something that in real time feels almost concrete. Then we have the dives. The dives are technical extreme. The depth is 90 meters. We have a trigas mix, helium, nitrogen, and oxygen. We have 10 to 15 minutes of effective bottom time, and we have up to 90 meters of decompression stops on the way up. Stefan Hochmund describes it as seeing like an ant on a football field, 1 or 2 meters visibility, fissile lenses, mud and sediment that instantly turn the water milky white. The diver's most important observations are that the surface feels hard, dark, and like burnt plastic or concrete. There are abrupt transitions, step-like structures, and something that feels like a 90 degrees corners. There's a round hole about 20 centimeters according to one eyewitness account, where sediment appears to move in and out like breathing. We have samples. We have small fragments that has been brought up and sent to multiple laboratories. Here the picture diverge. Early popular sources talks about metal and slag-like materials. Geologist Volker Brückert at the University of Stockholm analyzed the samples and identifies basalt, a volcanic rock, as well as ferromanganese concretions and iron oxide like limonite and goethite. His interpretation is that basalt could have been transported here by glaciers, ferromanganese and iron oxides forms as participates in the seabed over long periods, and the structure most likely connected to glacial and post-glacial geology. The geology takes is that the geologist and geomorphologist, including Jarmo Kortenheimer and others, point out that the areas is full of drumlins, elongated shapes created by glacial movement. The runway visible in the sonar could be the lee side of a drumlin or the combination of erosion tracks. 90 degrees corners and steps can occur in basalt through fissures and erosion. And sonar artifacts that make natural rocks look like technical and smooth. In the established academic reading, the Baltic Sea Anomaly is therefore an unusual but natural geological formation, basalt and hard rock with ferromanganese congregations, shaped by the ice age glaciers and later erosion, and made visually dramatically by sonar and difficult visibility. So that is the boring explanation. But it is important as a reference point. If we stuck to the geology reports, we could honestly close this episode right here. But there are some elements that keeps the story alive. We have the electronics and the dead zone. Several independent sources, both the Ocean X themselves and later interviews with, say, Dennis Aubert, describes that satellite phones loses connections, GPS systems behave absurdly, radar shows objects that aren't there, ROVs and cameras shut down, and this happens when the ship is within 200 meters of the object, but disappears when it sails away. They repeat, according to their own account, that they test multiple times over the coordinates, everything dies 200 meters away, and everything works. This leads them to talk about an electronic dead zone. Scientifically speaking, this is an unresolved claim. There is no public, systematic measurement of electromagnetic conditions at the site. Some of the technical failures could possibly be explained by cold condensation, poor connections, weak equipment, and stress. And Ocean X has later explained that certain cameras failed due to condensation in sub-zero temperatures. But here it remains residual experiments of repeated interference that has not been satisfactorily explained. Also, we have the temperature in the breathing hole. The diver Stefan Hogman reports once a temperature close to 0 degrees Celsius at the object, where one would normally expect 4 or 5 degrees in that depth. He describes a small hole where the sediments appears to move in and out as it were breathing. These are highly dramatic images, but they are based on one dive, extreme cold and stress, and very limited visual documentation. Geologically, a hole where sediment and water move could, for example, be an outlet of a minor gas or fluid seep, something we know from mud volcanoes and pingo-like formations. So this is a possible natural explanation, but we have no hard data, only the experience. If we look at the shape and the runway, across the sources I've seen, there is two quite different interpretations. Some geologists see drumlin with harder rock core and softer metal around, which could produce a top and a natural lee that resembles a ski track on the sonar. The other one is several on the Ocean X, especially in the later interviews, describe that the object sits on top of the seabed like a plate on the table, and that the runway looks like something heavy as slid across the mud and stopped abruptly. This part is difficult to determine from public data. If the object really were completely detached and resting on a narrow foot, that would be harder to explain glacially. Conversely, it's also possible that low visibility and sonar perspective make the drumlin top look more separated than it is. Here we are in the category of real anomalies in the description, but without sufficient data to conclude anything extraordinary. Now let's take the alternative theories more seriously on their own terms, and then go through the supporters, should we say, best arguments. If we look at the shape and the architectures, supporters focus on a nearly perfect circle about 60 meters, a seemingly 90 degrees corners, walls and corridor-like passage, stairs on terrace-like structures, and a hatch, a circle in a square form on the top. The argument goes, water and ice normally round structures over time. Pure shape, corners, and repeatedly geometry suggest design. And the combination of a disc shape and runway resembles classical iconography of crashed aircraft. Second, we have the material and burning. The alternative interpretations points to the basalt with fine crystals, suggest rapid cooling from a very high temperature, dark burnt surface and cracks that resemble ceramic that has been too hot, and traces of metal in some samples interpreted as remnants of a technological structure. In some dramatic scripts, the anomaly is described as a corpse of technology, which is technology so old and exposed to so violent energies that the material has mineralized and now resembles basalt but still carries the geometry of something artificial. Here, parallels are drawn to fossils that the original organic material is gone and the shape is preserved in stone. Applies to the Baltic, the original technical material is gone, but the shape, the walls, the edges, the corners, that remains in stone. Third, we have the electronics and the active field. The interpretation of the dead zones goes like this. A passive magnetic mountain might slightly disturb a compass, but it wouldn't complete knock out the satellite communication, sonar, and digital electronics with a shape radius. It looks more like an active field, something that is emitting energy or a residual field from advanced technology. Some goes further and see parallels to classic UFO reports where a car stalls, radio dies, and aircraft experience instruments failure near objects. Then we have the AI scans. Some of my textbook builds on a modern layer on top, stories about AI algorithms that had analyzed sonar data and cannot classify the object as natural. The claims goes something like that. AI has recognized pattern that does not match known geological formations. Radical symmetry, grooves, and the hats resemble designs in databases of ships and underwater infrastructure more than rocks. And AI therefore flagged the anomaly as something unknown. The problem is that there is no publicly documented AI analysis with data, models, and error margins. So its coverage in popular sources is not verified research. Then we have the historical and mythical connections. Some of the alternative researchers I've seen connect the anomaly to ancient text about flying cities, sky wars, Vimanas in Indian scriptures, imagining crashed craft from a very distant past. We also see prehistoric civilization that could have built underwater monuments skinned to Yonaguni in Japan or roads like the Bimini Road, but in the Baltic, when the area was land and or shallow lakes at the end of the Ice Age. And then we have the corpse of technology as a framework. The most sophisticated alternative models I've seen does not necessarily say a crashed spaceship yesterday, but rather that the anomaly could be the remains of a very ancient technology, perhaps terrestrials, perhaps not, that has been heated, compressed, and then mineralized. That basalt and ferromanganese are not original rock, but the results of something entirely different being transformed under extreme heat and pressure. And that is the preserved geology and possibility that the magnetic field points to a technical origin. This requires us to accept that our current geology could be fundamentally wrong about the formation, and we are dealing with an unknown category. As a source critical host, it is important to say these are hypotheses, these are not evidence. They are based on eyewitness account, incomplete data, and secondary retellings. But they constitute the most coherent alternative narrative. If we look at the rabbit hole, military, climate, and these kind of things, once you accept that the possibility that something could be artificial, the connections begins to spread. If we look at the other underwater mysteries, some of the sources I've seen specifically draw parallels to Yonaguni, the massive stair and wall-like structures out of Japan in the sea where geologists says is natural and alternative researchers says sunken city. If you look at the Bimini roads, the roadblocks in the Bahamas that looks like a paved road, but are explained by mainstream geology as a natural beach rock. The point for the supporters is that the Earth is already delivered a number of formations that lies in the gray zone between geology and architecture. The Baltic Sea Anomaly becomes the Nordic version, just with an extra twist, electronics. And then there is the Baltic Sea as strategic as geological hotspot. At the same time here, we have the Baltic Sea that has become kind of a double anomaly. We have climate scientists documented record of low water levels, dead zones with oxygen depletion, and complex current changes affected by the jet stream shift and Arctic warming. Then we have large ship turbulence, and that is directly reshaping the seabed in places. Propellers steer up the sediment and create thousands of small scars in the bottom. That is, while the world debate one mystery object, the entire Baltic Sea is undergoing dramatic, well-measured changes, and has already contained violent stories like the Estonia, where conspiracies, secrecy, and contradictory investigations still haunt. And this leads to a much larger narrative. Perhaps the anomaly is just one piece in the sea where we don't understand half what's going on, geological, climatically, or political. And then we have the military and intelligence threat. If we look in the material I have collected, we see that the Swedish Navy ships has observed near the expeditions without explanations. We see stories of cigar-shaped craft near the Swedish plutonium plants. We see NATO exercises and Russians' presence in the area. And we see a general sensitivity around underwater cables, gas pipelines, and military installations in the Baltics. This opens up a more down-to-earth but still dark scenarios. The anomaly could be an advanced but terrestrial Cold War technology, for example, a sonar array or surveillance system that no one wants to have poked too much. We also have electronic interference that could be intentionally a still active field designed to confuse enemy sensors. We could also have the lack of willingness to fund further investigations could be because of someone knows more than they are saying. We must hold fast, however, there is no open, verifiable documents linking NATO or others directly to the anomaly as a secret installation. But in a region where every passenger, or should I say, where even a passenger ferry wreck like Estonia has spawned theories about secret military cargo, the suspicion is understandable. If you look at the criticism, then we could say, where is the alternative theories stumbling? And there we can see that the basalt in the Baltic is not itself mysterious when you consider ice age glacial transport. Glaciers can move large boulders over very long distances. Ferromanganese concretions and iron oxides produce dark, sooty surfaces that can look burnt, but without actually being so. And nature can create the right angles and steps through fissures and erosion, especially in basalt and sandstone. If you see columnous basalt and in a coastal cliff worldwide, when comparing to Yonaguni and Bimini, we see that the nature has repeatedly fooled us with architecture that looks like to be geology. If we look at the electronic interference, there is, should we say, more down-to-earth explanations. Critics points to equipment is out of specification. Cold near or below freezing and moisture can produce plenty of errors. Camera, tapes, and electronics can behave very strangely under such conditions. Antenna and fuses can be misinstalled, especially on a ship already struggling with leaks and technical problems. We also have subjective filters. If you expect mystery, you remember the errors that fit the story and downplay the trivial ones. There is no reproducible instrument-based measurements series that has been published clearly. about a 200-meter electromagnetic zone over the object. Without that, the dead zone is an interesting but it's weakly substantiated claim. Then we have the AI argument. Without access to the raw sensor data, knowledge of which AI model is used, and the insight of training data and error rates, we can't use the AI stories to anything more than modern folklore. If we look at the corpse of the technology, the hypothesis is that we are seeing mineralized technology is creative, but it suffers from no unambiguous technical components has been observed. All analyzed samples we know of fit neatly into geological categories, and the entire mechanism requires constellation or additional assumptions, unknown energies, unknown glow, unknown technology origin, etc. That makes it a speculative explanation that is not a scientific theory. So what actually holds up? If we pull the threads together and stick this to source question, we can now create a kind of a status list. It is well documented that a roughly 60-meter wide object at roughly 90 meters depth has been found in the Gulf of Bothnia. Sonar and multibeam data showing a prominent structure and a complex surrounding terrain, including a possible ridge to another anomaly. We have physical samples that is analyzed as basalt, ferromanganese concretions, and common mineral consist of with ice age and post-ice age geologically. We also know that divers has actually been down there with extremely limited time and visibility, and that descriptions are consistent with each other, but not necessarily with artificial origin. If you look at the probable one, then at least part of the mystery is due to pareidolia, hard to say. Our tendency to see patterns, stairs and hatches in complex, unclear image. That several technical problems are due to environmental condition and equipment rather than object protecting itself. That is, and the object is a dumpling core similar formation, partially exposed and visually dramatic on sonar. If you look at the unresolved one, where there is a consistent, strong electromagnetic anomaly over the object, this requires some dedicated measurement campaign. The precise geological history, where the basalt and the concrete material come from, and whenever the object that is partially detached or firmly anchored. And if you look at the weak substantiated, or should I say speculative one, that is that the anomaly is a crashed spaceship, Vienna, or intergalactic craft. There is no technical component or metals has been identified, no internal structures has been documented. The AI has proven that the object cannot be natural, no public reproducible results. That is that there is an organized cover-up where the military suppress research. There are indications, but there is no hard evidence. If you look at the secret Cold War installation, that is possible, but samples point to rock and not composite and electronics. So, if I should sum it up, I could say, what do I say to the listeners? If you're going to be honest in a podcast format, but also preserve the mystery, I might phrase it like this. With the data that is publicly available, the most robust explanation is that the Baltic Sea Anomaly is a natural formation. Hard rock, basalt, and ferromanganese shaped and moved by ice and sea and made dramatical by the sonar's way of drawing image. The ocean team's experience, the excitement, the technical problem, the feeling of something, not just a rock, are just as real as human experiences. But that doesn't automatically make them evidence for anything unusual or unnatural. The alternative theories, the UFO, the prehistoric construction, corpse of technology, etc., are creative attempts to make all the puzzles fit. They work well as stories, but stumble when held against the laboratory results and known geology. So, what are we left with? An object that is very likely natural, but in context so strange that we keep projecting stories on it. Some experience, especially the electronic anomalies, they deserve more systematic investigation if someone ever wants to pay for a serious open expedition. And a reminder that we still know surprisingly little about our own seabed at the same time that we are sending robots to Mars. As a host, I can't tell you what to believe. I can only draw the line between what we can reasonably call facts, what is possible, down-to-earth explanation, and what is pure speculation. But perhaps still worth dreaming about it when you are looking at over the Baltic Sea at night. My name is René, and next time you see a grainy sonar image that looks something like a Millennium Falcon, you are welcome to remember one thing. It could be a spaceship, it could be a rock, or if you want to be really Swedish pragmatic, it could be a rock that really, really wants to look like a spaceship. And the names of the people in this episode, Høgeborn, Kortemeyer, Brygger, I can just say they are not made for my Danish tongue. But the mysteries they work with, they are perfect. See you next time.